On this episode of Insight, to the rescue. Who steps in to help us and at what cost?
1 minute I was walking on the track and the next minute I was tumbling through the air.
As I lifted my leg, my foot fell off the end of my leg.
It fell off the end of your leg.
It just limped.
My phone started dinging saying, Saskia and Adam and the patrol have just done an amazing rescue. Watch the news tonight.
Nature is very unpredictable and it's got to be respected.
You risked your life. Would you do it again?
Yeah, I'd definitely do it again.
Did you feel like a hero?
Nah, I'm not a hero. Some of these guys are heroes. I'm not a hero.
Monique, 2 years ago, you were going on a hike with some friends and you were hoping to get some good views and take some photos. What was the day like?
It was a Saturday afternoon and we had some time to kill before we went camping. And so we decided we go to Empress Falls. There'd been heaps of rain and so the waterfalls were crashing down. And there was this little side track that we thought we'd go get a couple good photos, get a nice view. And 1 minute I was walking on the track and the next minute I was tumbling through the air.
Do you remember anything about your fall?
Time is a very strange construct when you're falling through the air. I remember it feeling like, an hour, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but it was probably about 10 seconds, thinking, this is it, this is when I die. And then I just remember hitting the ground and having this full body burning sensation, just like a pain that I'd never felt before.
Did anyone come to help you?
Yeah, so I had 2 friends with me, very thankfully, my beautiful friends. I remember trying to stay awake because I think I had this thing in the back of my head that if I fall asleep, I'm not going to wake up. So I just have to keep myself awake. I remember kind of doing a quick self-assessment. I'm a nurse and I was like, can I wriggle my toes? Can I close my eyes and open my eyes? Can I wriggle my fingers? Like what's hurting, what's not? Again, in about 10, 20 seconds, my friend Tim was there to help me. However, it felt like so much longer and it felt like I was going to have to get out by myself.
Do you know how far you'd actually fallen?
I'd been told it was about 8 to 10 metres.
What was it like when you were waiting for the emergency services to arrive?
Terrifying. There was so much uncertainty and I was also in hypothermic shock. So I was in quite a bit of water and it was quite a cold day. And so it was this compounding pain, water, cold, fear, and just anxiety of this overwhelming thing that had happened in a split second. We were just meant to go camping. The next minute I'm at the base of a waterfall.
Dave, you're a critical care paramedic. You were one of the first rescuers on the scene. How dangerous a situation was Monique in?
Monique was in a very dangerous situation. In terms of the environment, she was at the base of this cliff, partially submerged in a creek line, so she's still wet. There's a wind coming up through the valley. Last light is approaching quite quickly. And then in terms of her clinical presentation, she's got quite serious injuries. So she's got an injury to her arm, her leg, her nose, and a possible spinal injury that's going to make getting her out of there very complex.
Well, just looking at that New South Wales Police body camera footage, Dave, you feature in that.
Yep.
What was your priority as you assessed Monique's injuries?
There's a couple of priorities that we have when we arrive on scene. The first is obviously doing a really thorough clinical assessment to work out what sort of injuries Monique has and starting to manage those. So, popping a drip in to give her some pain relief, getting her out of the water, getting her dry and warm on a litter, splinting her injuries. But then I think equally as important is providing some reassurance to her, creating a space of kind of emotional and psychological safety for her so that she feels like things are going to be okay.
Monique, what was the extent of your injuries?
So I'd fractured my L1 in my spine. I had absolutely obliterated my elbow, so I had multiple fractures to my elbow. My radial head was completely shattered along with my ulna and it was dislocated as well. So it's what they call a terrible triad. And so I ended up having a radial head replacement and a follow-up surgery after that. And I've been left with 50% movement and strength in my left arm. Along with the back and the elbow, I had broken nose and a damaged patella as well. Wow. I'm so grateful that there was no brain injuries, there was no bleeds, there was no internal bleeding, and it could have just been so much worse. However, I am in constant pain with the elbow, kind of 1 to 5 most of the time. It limits me at work sometimes, like I'm not able to do CPR, so I wouldn't necessarily be able to maybe have some of the career opportunities that I would have hoped. However, it's a little part of the story compared to how much life I have left now.
Neil, about 4 years ago, you didn't turn up for work one day. Your colleagues were pretty worried about you. Where were you?
Sunday morning, I decided I'd go for a bushwalk. I'd asked a few friends during the week if they wanted to come, but everybody was busy. I thought, it's only a 3-hour walk. I've done it many times before. It'll be all right, I'll just go and do it myself. And off I went.
Were you an experienced bushwalker?
Very much so. I've been doing the walk in the club for years as a training walk for newer members to tackle harder obstacles. And so there's harder sides to the track or easy sides. And so if somebody couldn't tackle a harder part, we could always do the easy part. And on the day I just decided, well, I won't put myself at any risk. I'll just do the easy part of the track, make sure that nothing's overly changed so that I can run the day in the club.
You were about 2/3 of the way up to the waterfall. What happened next?
I was on the easy part of the track, climbing up on the right-hand side of the waterfall where that curved line is. My left foot started to slide, and I quickly looked down to see my foot sliding and saw this white powder coming out from under my foot. I quickly looked up to see if I could grab something to stop my slide, and before I could, my right foot went, and over I went.
You fell into the water. How far?
I followed that curve down the waterfall, and straight away in my head was like, I'm looking down and going, okay, this is not going to be good. This is going to be a serious accident. I obviously was out like this. I vividly remember going bang into the wall and stopping my progress in one direction. And the next thing I felt was crash as I landed on a rock ledge just under the water surface, where my leg and my back both at the same time just felt this intense pain.
Did you know what had happened to your body? Did you know what the injuries were?
At that stage, I had no real idea what had happened. I'm now in the water. I now realise that I've got to swim because I've got 20 or 30 feet of water to cross. And I start to swim, and I'm thinking, well, there's something pretty funky going wrong with my leg. But I kept swimming, and I got to the beach on the other side. It was a gravel beach, and I pulled myself up on the beach. And I thought, well, I'll lift my leg out of the water to see what it is. And as I lifted my leg, my foot fell off the end of my leg.
It fell off the end of your leg?
It just limped off the end of the leg.
You were on your own, Neil. What did you do?
Didn't panic, that's for sure. I've had years in training in the SES and been bushwalking for 12, 15 years. So had a lot of experience of dealing with other people's injuries and stuff in the past. So I knew that the first thing I needed to do was look after the leg. Fortunately for me, it wasn't an open compound fracture. I had no open wound at all, considering the damage that was done to the leg. And so I immediately splintered the leg to stabilise it because I knew it was pretty bad. Once I had done that, I thought, okay, now I've got to ring for help. So I reached into my pack. I got my dry sack out with my phone. I had no range. I'm in a rock gorge, surrounded. And I thought, well, I need to get out of the gorge to try and get range. I'm only 40 kilometres from the CBD of Brisbane, and I've got no phone range. So I went to put my phone in my pocket, missed my pocket, and the phone fell in the creek.
What did you think when you lost your phone?
That's when this went from, oh crap, this is a bad day, to this is now life and death. I was in deep rainforest in a creek system that nobody but our club knows. So I'm on nowhere near any known walking tracks or trails, except for coming back down the junction of the two creeks I started at. There's a dirt road, and a lot of the locals use that dirt road for exercise. My plan was to get back to that junction for the dirt road, but also because I knew there was a large clearing, and if I was going to have to be rescued or be found by helicopter, it would give me half a chance.
So you decided you had to rescue yourself. How did you do that?
I couldn't stand up because of the damage to the leg, and then I realised how bad my arm was. I had pretty much done the same amount of damage to my arm. I didn't even know how bad the injury to my spine was until they told me in hospital I crushed a vertebrae. And so I basically crawled on my bum and on my elbow, and I just crawled with my pack. Yeah, it wasn't an easy task.
How far did you crawl for? How long did it take?
I thought it must have been about 3 kilometres. I've since been back, and it's 600 metres.
Wow.
It took me 2 days.
600 metres for 2 days.
2 days.
And then you were found?
I heard a helicopter flying over, and I thought, okay, maybe something's already underway, something has already worked out what was going on, but I had no real way of knowing was there something happening or not. I thought, well, they're not here. I better move the last 50 metres across to the grass. And within about an hour of that, I heard the helicopter come and he flew straight over the top of me and they were heading off into the distance. And I thought, they've missed me, that's it, I'm going to have to wait even longer. Anyway, they eventually turned and the helicopter came in from my right. He stopped and then he backed up and that's when I knew I was going to be rescued.
Wow, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Extraordinary. Joanne, 32 years ago, your family received a fax to say that your brother James was in trouble. Where was he?
James was a medical student. Back in 1991, he and a fellow student decided to go to Nepal to do some prac work, but of course also to do some trekking. James and Tim had decided towards the end of their time in Nepal to go off and do a relatively easy trek that took 3 or 4 nights. Unfortunately, Tim developed an injury and had to return to Kathmandu. And the arrangement he and James had made was they'd meet in Kathmandu for drinks on Christmas Day. By December 29th, with no sign of James, Tim thought he should alert James's family in Australia that he'd been in contact with the Australian Embassy and that some searching had begun.
At this stage, James had been missing for a week. You were back home in Brisbane. Were Australian authorities able to assist?
We were told very clearly 2 things. One was that we should not be in touch with the media, and the second was that no one should go over there. We should let them handle it and we should stay put in Australia.
How did that advice sit with you?
In those days, there was no mobile phone, no internet. We had one phone line in. It was dodgy at best. You never knew if you're going to get through or not. There was a terrible language barrier. And it was getting very, very frustrating to be sitting back. His life was at stake.
So what did you decide to do when you weren't getting any traction
Just
there?
to go there.
You went to decide to rescue him yourself?
I went to go over there to do the best I could.
Had you ever been involved in a search and rescue before?
No. I'm a veterinarian by trade, and we'd done a little bit of travel, but I was going to be totally honest, I'd have to say I probably didn't even really know where Nepal was.
He'd been missing a week, it's snowy, it's cold. Did you think that he would still be alive?
I hoped he would. I mean, I think either way, someone just doesn't disappear into thin air, right? So either James or his body had to be somewhere. All my father said to me was, you go over, but you're not to leave Kathmandu. You're not to go up in any helicopters or go out on any trails, because one child missing was quite enough, thank you.
Mark, you were driving home one day when you saw a car veer off the road and crash. What did you do?
I was driving and the lady had a seizure and she just veered across 2 lanes and she just went... Woof.
Did anyone else stop to help?
No, out of the 30 cars, there's only me and one young fella that pulled up, which I thought was, man, that was disappointing. I didn't think humanity was like that.
When you went to the car, what did you find?
I got to the back of the car. I sort of froze for a little bit. I was a little bit scared. I didn't know what I was going to see. I didn't know, if it was going to be a mutilated body, fire, and then, after a couple of seconds, I slowed my adrenaline down and then just went up, knocked on the side of the window trying to wake her up because she was out cold. I opened the door and straight away I was hit overwhelming fumes. Car was still going. And I thought, man, I jumped over her, turned the key off, got back out of the car, and I started vomiting, just spewing up because there was too much. And I said to the other fella, I said, come here. Because I was scared by myself. Having someone there just made it, I could do it, I could deal with it. So he come over, he didn't want it. I said, mate, just come here. And I said, can you smell that? He's like, yeah. Yeah, I got in, felt her pulse, made sure she was low, I could feel it. I didn't want to move her either, just in case the injury she had, like she'd done something to her neck and you moved her, then, well, it's going to be worse.
You were in a position to sort of film what was happening and you posted it on TikTok of your very good Samaritan rescue.
Yeah,
Let's have a look at that,
thanks,
Mark.
mate. Oi, wake up. Oi. Oi, cops are on their way. Are you good? Yeah, she just took a drive up here. Now she's having a sleep. Yeah. Look at this, mate. Ambo asked me to drive the Ambo. I'm driving an Ambo, boys. That's not me.
So why did you film the rescue, Mark?
Man, it was safety first, so people would go if something happened. Didn't know if it was going to catch fire, and you know if something happened, then people would know what happened.
Yeah.
And because I did put it up, her family heard about it first through TikTok. The lady ended up getting in touch with me through TikTok as well. So I wasn't just an idiot.
What did she say to you when she got
She
in
just thanked
contact?
me.
Saskia, you're almost 17 and you're a volunteer surf lifesaver. Last summer you were on patrol at a Sydney beach when you heard that some boys were in trouble. What were you told?
My patrol captain had heard over the radio that there were a couple of teenage boys that seemed to be having some trouble after they'd jumped from the cliff into the ocean around the blowhole, and that they needed to send an IRB, a rubber ducky boat, out to go check to see what was happening.
What did you know about that spot, the blowhole?
At Warriewood, the blowhole is pretty notorious. People have really seriously injured themselves there. So it's a big spot that keeps us in business, I suppose.
So people kind of jump off there. Has anyone died there?
I believe so,
Wow.
yes.
What did you and your colleagues decide to do?
I was in the boat near the cliff. We could see the boys in a cave off to the side. Because the waves were too big and too rough for us to drive the boat in and pick them up from there. The driver of the boat, Adam, and I, we talked about, do you think you're able to jump in and swim over with a tube and bring them out yourself?
Wow. How were you feeling as you headed towards that blowhole?
Well, I'd never been involved in anything like this before, so I was quite nervous, and I was just trying to think of all the possible things it could be. What was the condition of the boys? How injured are they? And what are we going to have to do?
Danger whipped up off Warriewood Blowhole. A cliff jumping excursion leaves a 15-year-old injured. The surf lifesaver smashed by pounding swell.
We can see you there doing your rescue. Can you talk us through how you rescued those boys?
I hopped in, I had my life jacket on and my yellow rescue tube around me. I swam over towards the cave and towards the rocks, and I was trying to climb up on them, but the waves were so big and so rough, I was just getting pulled out and then pushed back into them, you know, getting bashed against them. So it was quite tricky to get up onto the rocks.
Were you eventually able to reach them?
I was, yeah. After a minute or two, I climbed up and I got into the cave where they were.
And how were they? Were they okay?
They were shaken. One of the boys had a suspected concussion, so he wasn't completely aware of what was happening, I suppose.
When you arrived there, what did you say to them?
I introduced myself. Hi, my name's Saskia. I'm a lifesaver. I did a brief first aid spinal concussion protocol on the boy that had been injured. I asked him, you know, questions. Do you know where you are? What's your name? Do you remember what happened? He didn't, so I had to ask his friends if they knew what had happened.
Did the boys say anything to you?
Yeah, they were lovely. They were very thankful when their friend was, you know, going off in the ambulance, and then about a week later they sent me flowers, which was lovely.
Sashi, you're Saskia's mum. You're also a lifesaver. Were you there that day?
No, I was in New Zealand.
Wow.
So the first I heard about it was when my phone started dinging on the Surf Lifesaving Patrol WhatsApp saying, Saskia and Adam and the patrol have just done an amazing rescue. Watch the news tonight. I was thinking, what's happened?
Is she okay? What did you think when you saw what your daughter had done?
I was amazed. Looking at the footage and seeing the waves and being familiar with the blowhole area, my first thought was, gee, there's no way in the world that I would have wanted to go into the water myself.
Wow.
It just looks so big.
Stephen, you've worked in rescue agencies for decades. You're now at the New South Wales State Emergency Service. 99 people drowned in Australia last summer. That's up 10% from the previous summer. What do you think is driving the increase in drownings and rescues?
People are certainly enjoying the coastline for sure, but a lot of the beaches are unpatrolled, and we've had to really have a good look at how we look after those beaches, you know, with surf lifesaving, ambulance, police, doing a complete joint effort to keep an eye on people that traditionally have never gone to the beach, have no appreciation of what a rip looks like, and if they are caught in a rip, what to do to get out of it and to save themselves.
Do those remote locations make those rescues more difficult?
The remote locations certainly make it difficult. Having said that, I think we've got some of the best emergency service workers in the world.
Joanne, you stopped at nothing to find your brother who was missing in Nepal. How did the search go?
We had over 78 men go out over 660 man days of searching an area of 1,000 square kilometres. We had the Himalayan Dog Squad involved. I consulted Rinpoche and Chini Lamas. There were psychics. I met the Prime Minister of Nepal. I managed to persuade, with the help of some friends, the General of the Helicopter Service to do all the training flights up to where James was. And I changed my flight home 3 times. And every time I was about to come home, something would happen, and it was enough to make me think, hang on, I've got to stay here, I've got to keep going.
Your brother was eventually found. How long did it take?
James was missing for 42 days.
42 days. Here's the moment the helicopter found your brother. Joanne, what was it like to be reunited with your brother James?
It was amazing, it was remarkable. I didn't actually quite believe it. He came down and I was, I don't know, it was like half of Kathmandu had arrived at the airport, so word had got out and I was pacing the tarmac and the helicopter lumbered to the ground and he pulled open the door of the helicopter, and at that moment, it was James, And he managed to get up and he came into my arms. He said, "Thank you so much. I can't believe you're here."
Joanne, your brother's rescue was a personal mission, but the next guest was saved by 20 strangers. Here's Jill Hicks' story.
I'm the supervisor at Aldgate. We've just had a big explosion. There appears to be something ahead of the train in the track.
The number you have reached?
We have thick smoke coming from the tunnel. We have customers on the track.
On the track?
We're sorry.
We need ambulances and water to King's Cross. I understand what you're saying. And Russell Square.
The emergency services have declared they're on their way down there. We're issuing a system-wide code amber.
Please hang up and try again.
The British capital, London, is reeling tonight from a series of explosions.
Australian woman Jill Hicks among the survivors. My first rescuer was the person that stood between me and the 19-year-old suicide bomber. Just his body alone shielded me from the impact of the bomb blast. So we were on the Piccadilly line, which is one of the deepest tunnels in the network, and it was an hour before rescue could reach us. I'd lost both of my legs. I'd been without a pulse, without a heartbeat for 30 minutes. It was Tracy from the London Ambulance Service who used the discarded bits of cloth and coats and materials that were all on the carriage floor, and she created a makeshift type stretcher and put my body in this stretcher made of coats, and I was passed from one rescuer to the next. I'd say probably 20 people that morning held my body. These extraordinary characters like Dave. Dave was a senior manager at London Ambulance Service. He instinctively knew that I needed to be packed in ice. That alone saved my brain. When I arrived in hospital, I was given a little identity bracelet, and it said 1 unknown, estimated female. It shakes me to the core to think of that label. I was stripped bare to just be a human being, rescued only for my humanity. I've really attributed my ability to not hold hatred through the extraordinary feeling of deep, unconditional love that was shown to me from the rescuers.
Dave, you weren't involved at that London incident, but does that resonate with you, this idea that rescuers save without judgment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of paramedics and people that work in health have a deep calling to help other people. When people are in these really vulnerable moments, that's often when we see the best of humanity, and I think that's a prime example of it there, where, you know, we're really just humans connecting and holding each other in the chaos of whatever's happening, you know.
Phil, you've had a long career in the Army, the police and volunteer firefighting. In April 1996, you were with Tasmania Police when you got an urgent call to come into work. What were you told?
My phone rang and my wife at the time, I could hear her answer it, and she said, "Sergeant Spalding said you've got to go to work now, people have been shot." So quickly got up, got dressed, and we lived at a place called Dodgers Ferry, which is actually on the road to Port Arthur. And so I'm driving into Hobart, and there's just police car, ambulance, SES, special operations, everything going the other way, and got into town and then found the streets all blocked off and straight into the major incident room to start work that night.
And what had happened there?
A gunman had opened fire there at Port Arthur. Tragically 35 people killed, numerous people wounded, and it was a matter of trying to work out where he was and then how could this be negotiated because he still had hostages.
The gunman, Martin Bryant, was holed up in a guest house. He was shooting at police. What happened then?
So early on the Monday morning, the guest house suddenly burst into flames and somebody ran from that house on fire. And talking to both Victorian and Tasmanian Special Operations personnel later, they had no idea who that person was. And so they were grabbed, the fire was put out, and then it was found to be the offender, Bryant.
What happened to him when he was grabbed?
He was taken, immediately transferred to the Royal Hobart Hospital. There, shortly after, was formally charged with, I believe, one murder. So he was actually then under the Department of Justice, but he was being treated in the Burdens unit at the Royal Hobart Hospital.
Your job was to guard the gunman, to guard Martin Bryant in that hospital burns unit. What was it like for you having to protect the perpetrator?
I remember getting told I was going to have to look after him, to guard him. There were threats against him. People were coming to get him. Along the corridors, the victims were being treated, and one of the correctional officers, who was a friend of mine, he asked me the question of, what do we do? What do you do if someone comes to get him? And I remember making this comment, completely, in the policing sense, unprofessional. But I said, I'm here to look after you and the medical staff. I said, anyone who comes through that door, they can have him. I'm not going to put myself on the line for him. We had no briefing around the actions on what were we going to do if someone did come through the door. The last thing we wanted was a gunfight in the middle of the Royal Hobart Hospital.
10 years after the Port Arthur tragedy, you were managing police communications at the Beaconsfield mine collapse. While 2 miners were being rescued, a journalist passed out. What happened?
We noticed the Channel 9's Richard Carlton just moved through the crowd and asked one question and moved away, and that was very unusual, and my state government counterpart and I looked at each other and thought that was really quite strange. And then suddenly someone was calling me, and I looked around and I thought, oh, someone's fallen over. And Richard's producer, Howard Scarf, was calling me, and he said, Richard's collapsed. And I raced over and yelled to my state government counterpart during a live press conference, shit, it's Richard. And of course, everyone spun around with their cameras and it was going live. and we tried so hard to resuscitate. We got New South Wales ambulance out of the mine to come and assist us. Yeah, to no avail though.
How were you coping with what was going on?
Well, very strangely, in that 10 years, I took leave from police and went with the Australian Army to Iraq in 2003. So I had a real combination of, I guess, challenges. I came out of Iraq. A week after being out in Iraq, I was on the street in Hobart. Contract finished. No different to national service personnel from 40 years ago in Vietnam. It was Beaconsfield that finished me in policing.
Right.
It was fairly straightforward, but that's what finished me.
It just was that straw that broke the camel's back in terms of your mental capacity to cope?
It was indeed. And a lot of things that police do to this day can talk very openly about Port Arthur because it had a start, it had a finish. But with war's chaotic, war's out of control and there's no justice in war. And so, it's a real challenge on how you balance all that out. And so I ended up failing in the end.
Kenny, one day 2 years ago you were driving during peak hour over the Sydney Harbour Bridge when a car raced past you. What happened?
On my way to a normal 9-to-5 job, crossing the Harbour Bridge northbound on the outside lane, and the SUV came flying and cut me off. I was doing 70 Ks and it felt like I was staying still. He was flying and then head on to a van, a gentleman going to work. I then noticed 6 cars in front of me creeping past that accident, which was pretty obvious. You could feel the concussion from the impact from inside the car with the windows up. So as soon as I saw that, I pulled my work ute over. I got out and ran towards the white van, but noticed there was already a gentleman at the van helping. So I went for the SUV that was upside down.
The car that had raced past you?
Yes, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together. I didn't realise that was the car that flew by me because the impact happened with the bus in the way. I didn't see it. There was a gentleman already at the driver's side window pulling someone out. So I went around to the passenger side, just in case there was someone else in there. I had to push the smashed glass in and move the curtain airbags, because otherwise you couldn't see inside the vehicle. Noticed a strong smell of fuel at this point, and the engine bay was smouldering. When I realised there was no one else in the car, I came back around and helped the gentleman out of the vehicle. He was putting up a fight and then passing out, and then waking up, taking swings at us, and then passing out again. We managed to get him on the floor. At this point, the flames were a lot bigger, and I suggested we move him further away.
What did you later find out about the driver of the SUV?
High on meth, and that SUV was stolen. It occurred to me at that point that that was the guy that cut me off seconds earlier.
So you're on your way to work, you witnessed this accident. Did you think twice about jumping in to help?
No. I've got a subconscious need for relevance, and I have heavy anxiety on a day-to-day basis when things don't happen. But when something like this happens, I find serenity in it because I'm forced to think of here and now, and my mind stops wandering. So it was kind of good for me in a way.
Were you injured, Kenny?
Yeah, mildly injured. I attempted a Action Jackson power slide as I was going to the ute and ended up with glass in my knees. But that was it, yeah.
Did you need any treatment?
No, I'd picking the glass out on the way to work after that.
Okay, just got on with your day.
Yeah.
Okay. Sasha, you're a volunteer lifesaver. Do you ever think twice about rushing in to save someone?
I don't think you do rush in. I think as part of our training, we're taught to consider the danger to ourselves, the danger to bystanders or to a patient. So I think that goes through your head and then you rush in, but in a good way, in a considered way.
As a mother, how do you feel about your daughter Saskia being put at risk by other people's potentially risky behaviour?
It's going to sound strange, but I think because I'm a mother of teenagers, because I've been a teenager myself, I know what teenagers are like. So I understand when people take risks, particularly if they're teenagers. I also think it'd be great for teenagers to just have that controlled way of taking risks.
Dallas, you lead the police rescue team in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales. Are people taking bigger risks, do you think, in the great outdoors?
There's certainly been an increase in the volume of people getting out in nature, engaging in outdoor recreation or outdoor adventure, and particularly as a result of COVID. People are probably pushing the boundaries a little bit more, going into more remote areas. The internet and the accessibility to information makes it so much easier for people to learn about places now, and particularly social media. Someone will see a photo of a hidden waterfall on Instagram and decide that they want to go there. It's not hard to get directions or track notes on how to get there. Unfortunately, some of the people that are, going down that path probably don't really have adequate experience or appreciation of what those, what the dangers might be in going into some of those areas. And it might be something as simple as going into an area where there's no mobile phone reception, so that if it does go pear-shaped, that normal lifeline that, living in the city or living in towns or pretty much anywhere now where there is mobile phone reception, that lifeline's now gone.
Stephen, you work for the SES. How much do rescues generally cost?
Depending on the location, the potential injuries that person might have, it could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. We bring a couple of helicopters into a major search and we're using them for a number of days. That cost grows quite significantly very fast.
Who foots the bill for the cost of a rescue?
We don't invoice the person that's missing or the person that's lost or injured. We pay through our taxes. The government pays for those amazing services. And it's not just that one-off search and rescue. The cost is in around the equipment. It's around the training, the recruitment of adequate personnel and their training. But is it worth it? Absolutely.
Since the advent of mobile phones and social media, more people are dying in pursuit of the perfect photo or video.
Young selfie-obsessed Australians are putting their lives on the line.
A growing number of Australians have died in the quest for the perfect photo.
Samuel, you study social media content-related deaths. What does your research show?
This is a big issue worldwide, not just in Australia. There's a stronger law on social media for people to get content such as what we just saw, and there's a sort of intrinsic reward for doing so on social media. Many of these places are in beautiful locations, but also quite hazardous locations, and then it doesn't take much more to jump a barricade, and put yourself in an increased risk.
Should the practice be treated more seriously?
Yeah, I'm making the case that this is actually a public health issue, in the same way that road traffic accidents are a public health issue or smoking and things like that. And so there's clearly a need to communicate the risks of this kinds of behaviour in a way that actually resonates with people who are engaging in this behaviour. Because we know that what we're currently doing, such as putting up signs or even barriers, often doesn't work.
Dallas, do warning signs help at all?
Yes and no. It would be very harsh to say that they don't help at all, because I'm sure you would hope the majority of the society heeds the warnings and respects the fences and the signs. But having said that, we certainly see plenty of evidence of people who have total disregard for the signs and the fences that are in place for their own safety. And often those warnings are ignored with ignorance to what the dangers actually are. You can't fence the whole world off. People have to make their own decisions. I guess, just trying to convey that message that nature is very unpredictable and it's got to be respected.
Monique, you fell up to 10 metres while you were hiking to a waterfall. You weren't taking a selfie at the time, I'll just clarify that. Do you consider yourself a risk taker?
I'd say from day-to-day prior to this accident particularly, yes. I grew up in a very gung-ho family. My dad's nickname is Bullet at the gate. He does everything at 100 miles an hour, and I really took after him in that sense. Motorbike riding before musical exams, four-wheel driving when I was 6 weeks old. My family would always take risks in a calculated manner, and I was always the first one to push the red button when someone said not to and go up to the top of the mountain. And I think post this, it has changed my view a little bit.
I was going to say, have you changed that approach since your accident?
I think to a degree for sure. I don't go out to seek the adrenaline as much as I used to. I'm happy having a day at home and enjoying time just sitting and just being, which I think is something I was running away from. I always was looking for the next thing, looking for the next thrill, and wasn't just content with just sitting and being in my own head. And I think through this, I've really learnt to do that.
Neil, you fell 8 metres down a waterfall. You crawled for 2 days with a foot kind of hanging off before you were rescued. Has saving yourself affected your outlook on life?
100%. I don't stress or worry about minor details anymore. You know, life's too short, you know, and I've escaped death. People, when I had my first interview in hospital, are going, "Why are you so happy?" I'm like, "Because I'm here and I'm talking to you. I should be dead, but I'm not. I'm here. I'm alive." And I definitely struggled with depression, but for the most part, yeah, I've made a pretty good recovery.
Look at that. Let's go for a swim. Come on. Ready, set, go. Being with the dogs, it's an hour of mindfulness. And that, you know, lines me up for the day. You know, I feel a lot better mentally. Honey, good girl, come on. I've spent those 4 decades out there working in the community, assisting others, working with them on the worst day of their lives. My mental health today is completely shot. I have post-traumatic stress, major depression, inability to concentrate. Go! I'm very lucky to have great family support, particularly from my wife. Good boy. Ready to go home? Let's go. Honey came into our lives after we lost one of our other golden retrievers. Honey is very unique. She has that high level of emotional intelligence. So Honey certainly does keep me sane. Close contact with dogs induces a chemical reaction in humans, which is actually equivalent to a calming effect. And Honey certainly does that for me. I talk to dogs every part of the day. If my neighbours could hear me, they'd probably think I was mad. Going to watch TV? Eh? Going to watch TV? Mustard Dogs is on.
The 10 gorgeous Australian Border Collie pups.
I want Honey to live as long as I do. I'm not sure she'll ever get to that level. Honey isn't a rescue dog, she's a rehome. You know, her coming into our lives rescued me.
Phil, you've spoken about the sort of mental health effect of the work that you've done. Do you still feel compelled to rescue others despite that?
Not to the same degree. And as I get older, you know, we're going to need more people like Saskia here to be able to step up and do the hard stuff, because I would never have got in that water, I can tell you.
Saskia, you helped rescue 3 teenagers who were stuck in an ocean cave. How were you emotionally after the rescue?
For the first couple of weeks, I was feeling fine, but the next patrol I did a couple of weeks after the rescue, it was a very, very rough day. It was 2 metres at least swell, biggest I've ever seen it. They needed the IRB to go out to do a search and rescue because a man on a foil on a motorised surfboard had gone missing, and with the rough conditions and the rough surf, they weren't sure, you know, what's happened to him, where he was. And it was when I got in the boat and started going out over those big waves, that was, I guess, when I felt the impact after the rescue, and it was finally kicking in, and I just got so stressed and I was so anxious, and I was like, God, what's going to happen? Am I going to have to jump in the rough water again? This was a search and rescue. Am I going to find someone who's critically injured or even dead in the water? So I was quite fearful.
Did you end up seeking assistance and help around how you were feeling?
Yeah, I did. I mean, my close, family and friends and close community have been really helpful, and Surf Life Saving, after any big incident like this, they do have a really good support service. They'll provide a counsellor or a psychologist to speak to, and so that's what I did. They provided one for me, and I spoke to her for a few weeks about how I was feeling after the incident, but it was just really good to know that, I had all this support.
Stephen, you've been involved in hundreds of rescues for a range of emergency services. Can the mental load just get too much for rescuers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all have a bucket, and ultimately it's going to be one little drop and that bucket's going to overflow. But we deal with it. In the old days, we dealt with it really badly. In fact, it was shameful the way emergency service workers and military and defence personnel was supported. I think we've come a long, long way. I know within the SES we've jumped just so much in what we've done in the last few years with peer support, with welfare, with chaplaincy and a whole range of things. We're at a point we don't actually have to ask for it anymore. It's there for you, ready for you. We're getting better and better all the time. More to do? Absolutely, but we're on the right track.
Dave, you've been a paramedic for 17 years. What keeps you doing the job?
The job that I have is amazing and I love it. I think regardless of whether you're in a remote location in the bush somewhere or injured in your bathroom, the really beautiful thing about being a paramedic is we come to these people or patients at their most vulnerable time. We hold them and we tell them that it's going to be okay and we're going to get you the care that you need and we're going to take you to hospital and we're going to move to a point of acceptance for where we're at so that we can start moving forward.
Monique, Dave was one of your rescuers at the waterfall. What's it been like seeing him again?
It's been really great catching up with him tonight, actually. And I'm very grateful to be able to have this opportunity to actually acknowledge the instrumental part that he had in not only my physical rescue, but the emotional rescue as well. There was this very surreal moment where I remember I was all packaged up in my little burrito, ready to go up in the helicopter. And I just was I couldn't move my head at all. And I was just looking at the sky. And I remember it was the first time that I was like, this is a really beautiful day and it's going to be all right.
Wow.
And Dave was really one of the people who got me there. He was telling me stories the whole time, telling me, hey, we're going to pop a cannula in, we're going to do this. And he was really instrumental in guiding me in a personal way and keeping me up to date with what was going on so my mind didn't just wander and completely lose control of my own sanity in the situation.
Dave, what's it like for you seeing Monique again?
Oh, it's amazing. It's really lovely to close that loop, and it's the same with us. We so rarely get to follow up on our patients. It's really lovely to, see Monique and see that she's doing really well.
Joanne, you coordinated the search and rescue of your brother in the Himalayas. Was that an expensive process?
From memory, I think it cost us around $80,000 to $90,000. We were incredibly fortunate because when news got out that James was missing, people from all over Australia and even internationally started sending my parents donations. And my mum kept a list of every amount that came in. And one of the very few advantages of the media fallout after he was found was that we ended up being paid for the story. And what was lovely about that, particularly from James's point of view, was that everybody who donated money, we contacted them and asked them if they would like the money back. And if they did, we refunded it. And if they didn't, we donated it to Parton Hospital, which is the hospital where James was cared for after he was rescued.
Mark, you filmed a rescue when a woman drove up an embankment and had a seizure and she drove off the road. You posted that video online. What comments did you receive?
Oh, most of them are good ones. Some were bad.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What were some of the good ones? What did they say?
Not all heroes wear capes.
Oh.
Was one.
Did you feel like a hero?
No, I'm not a hero. Some of these guys are heroes. I'm not a hero.
Dallas, you're a police rescuer. How does the label hero sit with you?
It's quite an uncomfortable thing for me. The way I look at it, you know, certainly in the emergency services, we're trained, we're well equipped. Hopefully those things put together means we can go out and do the job we're tasked to do safely. We can manage the risks, we can make good decisions. But for me, it's that accidental, you know, rescuer, that passerby that comes across a situation that they never thought in their entire lives they'd be faced with, and they've got to make a split-second decision, whether they keep driving past, whether they, you know, turn and run the other way, or whether they get in there and help. And often that decision is made again without any real understanding of what the dangers might be. So yeah, to me it's those people that are probably more suited to the hero status.
Kenny, you rescued a man from a very fiery crash on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Have you ever heard from him?
No.
You risked your life. Would you do it again?
Yeah, it's I think if people start looking at even the smaller situations as a duty, I think it'll make a world of difference. Yeah, I'd definitely do it again.
Thank you so much, Kenny. Thank you to you all for being here tonight. Thank you to you too for watching. You can catch up on this episode or any others on SBS On Demand. I'll see you next time.